Cowboy saw his neighbor turn away a mail order bride. What he did next changed her life. Before we begin, take a moment to drop a comment with your city where you're tuning in from today. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, enjoy the story. Montana Territory, late June, 1880. The sun hung heavy and hot, baking the trail until the dust rose in gold clouds that lingered in the still air. An old wagon stood alone in front of an empty house. Its wheels sunk deep into cracked, dry earth. Beside it, a young woman stood with her shoulders squared. Her dress and bonnet faded from the long road. Her hand clutched a letter that trembled ever so slightly. Lawson Reed reined his horse to a halt. He took the paper, scanned the few blunt words. A rejection, as sharp and cold as a slap. Folding it once, he slipped it into his pocket and looked at her. His voice was low. Steady, you will not be sleeping out here. No promise, no poetry, just a firm, decent decision that would change both their lives. Montana Territory summer, 1880. The trail home to Lawson's ranch lay dappled in shifting cloud shadows. He had spent the morning checking the southern fence line, but as he topped the last rise, something stopped him cold. In front of Tom Dwyer's place, his neighbor to the west sat a weather-worn wagon. Alone in the yard, the porch was empty, the yard silent. No smoke curling from the chimney. Beside the wagon stood a woman young, straight-backed, the faintest tremor in her shoulders. Her bonnet was frayed at the edges, her dress worn thin from travel. In her hands, a letter shook under the glare of the sun. Lawson didn't have to ask. Tom had been bragging in town about sending for a bride from Chicago. Clearly, he'd changed his mind. She handed him the paper. 2 words stared back at him. Changed my mind. No apology. No explanation. Lawson folded it, slipped it into his pocket, and said quietly, his voice roughened by trail dust, "You will not be sleeping out here." She hesitated. I don't know you." He held her gaze. "That's fair. But you can see I'm not him." The road back to the rail depot was 20 miles of hard heat, and the house behind her was nothing but empty walls. Slowly, she stepped toward him. Lawson hefted her trunk onto the wagon and turned his team toward home. His ranch came into view, a plain white house on a rise, the red barn standing solid beside it. He opened the front door and nodded toward the room nearest the porch. "It has a lock. I'll sleep in the barn." She started to object, but he added, softer this time, "You've had enough men show you the wrong kind of welcome. I won't be another." That evening, he made beans and bread, setting her plate down first before serving himself. They ate in silence, not the strained kind, but the quiet of 2 strangers who'd found a roof to share and a measure of respect between them. It wasn't kindness for show. It wasn't pity. It was the first stone laid in something neither of them yet had a name for. Part 1. A new rhythm. Dawn came slow and quiet. The first light didn't burst in. It slipped through the cracks, like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. Silent but certain, the cottonwood leaves along the creek whispered in the breeze, and the porch boards still held the night's chill, like a secret not yet told. Lawson had already lit the stove, setting the coffee pot on before the birds even thought about singing. He moved without a sound heel to toe, coffee cup set down soft, as if the air itself might break. The door eased shut without a single creak. There are some men you can tell are good just by the way they touch a latch. Genevieve came into the kitchen, wearing the same dress as yesterday, but her hair was different, loosely pinned, with a few strands free against her neck, as if she'd let go of an old rule. She didn't ask where things were. Her hands simply found the sugar tin in the corner. the lid worn bright from use. She stood there, holding her cup in both hands, steam rising in a small cloud between them. The first sip brought a faint color back to her cheeks. They took their coffee to the porch. Out front lay a garden, just barely begun. Rows of dirt, still rough. A fence not quite straight. A scarecrow in a torn shirt, leaning in the wind. Beyond that, the hills lay in patches of light and shadow. Summer spread out like an old quilt. "You're up early," Lawson said, eyes still on the distance. "Habit. Where I used to live." Sleeping late meant getting left behind. He nodded once, tilting his head toward a row of carrots. "You take that side? I'm checking the west fence. I'll take care of it, so long as it stays put till I get there." They stepped off the porch together. The morning dew soaked into her shoes and darkened the leather of his boots. She lifted a hoe and a coil of twine from the railing, testing their weight like a seamstress, feeling the pull of fabric. He loaded wire and nails into the wheelbarrow, pushing it forward, the iron rim humming over stone, the smell of damp earth and fresh leaves mixed in the air. She knelt by the carrot bed, fingers parting weeds, pulling them free as if loosening a stubborn knot. Lawson glanced over, recognizing in her the patience of someone who's done hard work before, not rushed, not yielding. He turned away, not from shyness, but to give her that quiet. By mid-morning, the sun was high. He was setting a nail into a fence post when her shadow fell across him. She held out a dipper of water. He drank, not to the bottom, and handed it back. No one said thank you around here. That word was saved for things that truly needed it. "Your rows are straight," he said. "I lined them with the house's shadow when the sun came up. Easiest way to cheat." She smiled faintly, then told him about her father, a warehouse foreman in Chicago, where the noise was so thick you couldn't hear your own heartbeat. She looked toward the hills and said quietly, "This is the first time I've heard my own breathing." He drove another nail, slower this time. "Out here, every sound is what it is. The doors, the wind. The skillet's me setting it down wrong. The bird is a bird, and if it's trouble, I'll be there first." She said nothing, as if memorizing that sentence. The wind carried sage from the creek, and for the first time since stepping through his door, something in her chest began to loosen. That afternoon, they finished the fence. Crooked, but sturdy. She stepped back, let out a small, surprised laugh. He didn't look at her, only at the fence, but both knew what the laughter was for. Evening brought beans and cornbread again. No one apologized for repeating the meal. Under lamplight, she folded a dish towel into 3 perfect parts. He watched her hands and thought about jars with her handwriting on their labels. Shirts patched with matching thread. Not a dream, just measuring the future and finding room for it. When darkness settled in full, they stepped onto the porch. He sat on the lower step, hands resting open on his knees. She sat above, her shoulder level with the brim of his hat. The space between them felt exactly right. "You're safe here," he said, "and wanted here." She looked into the dark until the first star appeared. Then the second. I never thought those 2 things could be true at the same time. They can. She drew a deep breath. Then, "I'll learn the language of it." He nodded. The boards beneath them gave a soft pop as the night air cooled. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once, then was still. The lamp's glow stopped just shy of her locked door, as if it too respected the boundary. In this wide country that forgets people easily, there are plenty of tales full of gun smoke and pounding hooves, but there are also quiet Western romances like this one, where a bond grows from a morning coffee and a fence built side by side. Stories that don't need an audience to be true. He rose, took the cup from her hand, and tapped the door frame lightly. "Up early tomorrow." "I know." He kept the lamp low, She closed the door and turned the lock once, only once. In this country, safety is sometimes nothing more than a hinge that doesn't creak, a fence that doesn't lean, and 2 coffee cups cooling on the porch, where no one needs to explain why they stayed. Part 2, Music and Dance. That night, the sky unfurled like a black canvas scattered with silver dust, the stars glinting in a stillness so deep you could almost hear the wind changing course along the hillside. The oil lamp inside had been turned low, leaving a warm amber glow pooling in one corner of the porch. Genevieve sat on the steps, knees drawn up, chin resting lightly atop them, both hands wrapped around a tin mug of tea gone cold. The light was just enough to catch the softness of her features, but in her eyes lingered a faraway look, as though she were seeing someplace half a world away. Lawson emerged from the barn carrying something long, wrapped in an old oilcloth. He set it on the porch table, unwrapped it, and revealed a fiddle worn bare of varnish, the neck polished smooth by years of playing. Without a word, he checked each string, turning the pegs with a motion born of habit. Genevieve tilted her head toward him. "You play." "Never showed off," he answered, eyes still on the strings. "Why not?" No one ever asked. She pressed her lips together, lowering her gaze to hide the flicker of a smile. The first stroke of the bow came slow, a little rough on the opening note, then smoothed out, flowing like water over rounded stones. The melody was an old Kentucky tune, carrying both longing and peace, like it belonged to dirt roads and sunsets you'd want to sit and watch forever. A breeze slipped through the trees, the rustle of leaves weaving into the music. Genevieve closed her eyes, letting the sound seep into a place she'd kept silent for years. When she opened them again, she found her fingers tapping the rim of her cup in time. "You don't seem like the kind to keep music in a barn," she murmured. "I keep it for the right moment." The tune shifted, lightening into a quicker rhythm, playful as wind, teasing the new leaves. She laughed a small, clear laugh, and Lawson paused mid-bow, looking up. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, without the weight of caution or memory pressing it down. He tucked the bow beneath his arm, extending his free hand toward her. "No streetlights, no crowd. This porch will do." She hesitated, as though there was a thin river between them that she could cross in one step. Setting her cup aside, she let her hand brush against his. When Lawson pulled her up, their heartbeats fell into the same rhythm as the lingering notes in the airs. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first, the porch boards uneven, space too narrow. But then the fiddle's memory seemed to guide them. Her small turns caught the lamplight one moment, and the dark sway of tree shadows the next. Lawson's gaze never left her, not measuring, not searching, but listening, as if she were telling a story he didn't want to end. And Genevieve, in that moment, thought neither of train stations, nor abandoned letters, nor the city that had swallowed her youth. She thought only of the hand holding hers firm enough to keep her steady, yet light enough to let her go if she wished. She didn't wish to go. The tune ended in a slow turn. Lawson set the bow aside, leaned the fiddle against the porch wall, the faint thud of wood on wood, sounding like a quiet sigh. The night air moved through the cottonwoods, bringing the scent of dry earth and wild grass. Genevieve stood there, her hand still carrying the warmth of his. Neither moved to sit. The lamp lit half her face, leaving the other half in shadow, where her eyes held something unspoken. "I thought, coming here, I'd be starting a new life," she said softly, as if afraid her words might break in the air. Lawson stayed silent, shoulders loose, waiting. "I thought it would hurt. Being left behind, that I'd feel humiliated, angry." She shook her head faintly. "But all I feel is relief." The confession made him lean slightly toward her, searching her eyes. He didn't answer, with "It's all right," or "I understand" too easy for something that needed quiet to settle in. After a moment, he asked, "Why relief?" "Because I know. I dodged a life worse than being abandoned." He gave a small nod, gaze drifting toward the dark beyond the porch. "Would you really want to belong to a man like Tom?" "No, I just want to belong somewhere." She hesitated, then looked at him, voice low but sure. "And I don't know if I can belong here." He met her eyes, steady even with the wind tossing grit through the air. "You're safe here, and you're wanted here." She blinked, not because the words were sudden, but because they'd been spoken as truth, not promise. Somewhere inside her, a locked door seemed to hear the turn of a key. "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough." Silence followed, but the space between them was gone. Leaves brushed together above them, whispering agreement. A night insect tapped against the curtain and fell to the floor, its sound tiny yet somehow clear in the quiet. Genevieve drew in a deep breath, wanting to keep the scent of this night, the wood, the ghost of coffee, and the faint possibility of a new life beginning here. "I'm not ready. I'll wait." The way he said it, steady as the ground beneath their feet, made her chest tighten, not with hurt, but with the knowledge that he was giving her both choice and reason to stay. He picked up the fiddle and carried it inside, returning with 2 small wooden chairs. Setting one near the porch step, he pulled the other close enough that their knees were just half a hand apart. She sat, hands clasped loosely in her lap, hair spilling over her shoulders, a few strands lifted by the breeze as if inviting the night to touch them. Crickets sang in the darkness. Far off, on the hillside, a lone coyote called "not in threat," just as part of the night. For the first time, she didn't hear it as warning. Lawson leaned back, arms resting on the chair's sides. "Nights here? They're not like anywhere else. Not like Chicago," she said, with a faint curve of her lips. "Here, if you're quiet, you hear more." They stayed still, and just as he'd said, the sounds began to rise. Water murmuring in the creek, wind brushing the cottonwood trunks, a hen shifting in the coop. Each one had the shape of peace, and she realized she was sitting in the very middle of it. She let her shoulder rest lightly against his. Lawson didn't move away. In that quiet, something had changed. The guarded distance from the day she'd stepped off the wagon was gone, replaced by a shared breath. The cottonwoods whispered like soft cloth rubbing together. Genevieve closed her eyes and let the sound rock her. For the first time since leaving the city, she felt not alone. The moon lifted over the ridge, pouring silver across the yard. 2 people sat together on the porch, silent. But to any passerby, it would be plain they were no longer strangers, but something growing slow and sure, with no need to be rushed. Morning light slipped through the curtains, painting the room a pale gold. Genevieve woke to the sound of measured footsteps in the kitchen, no longer the sound of an intruder. It was the sound of morning itself. She washed her face at the porch basin, the cool water rinsing away an old layer of dust from within. Lawson was at the stove, back to her, pouring coffee. He tilted his head enough to know she'd come in, but said nothing at first. "Sleep well?" "Yes, this time." "I didn't dream at all." He poured 2 mugs, sliding one toward her. The heat seeped into her hands. They carried their coffee out to the same chairs as the night before. The yard was still wet with dew, the fence posts dark against the faint light. Birds perched along the rails, heads cocked like curious visitors. Genevieve watched them, then said slowly, "If I stayed." He glanced at her, waited. "I'd plant sunflowers along the fence, so by fall, this place would be all gold." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Then we'll plant them." The silence that followed was the kind shared by people already building something together. When the coffee was gone, Genevieve went to the cupboard without waiting to be told, pulling out cornmeal to make bread. The sound of the spoon stirring in the bowl mixed with Lawson's voice outside, murmuring to the horses as he tightened their saddles. No thank yous were exchanged, but every motion carried the quiet vow. I'm here, I'm doing my part, and I want to stay. By the time the bread was baked, its scent filled the porch. Lawson came in, pulling off his gloves. Smells good. First time I've cooked here. Hope it's not the last. She met his eyes through the steam, and for the first time, she no longer looked like a stranger in a temporary place. She looked like someone beginning to see her place in the picture. That evening, the sky was so clear, the far hills felt closer. Lawson cooked beans and salted pork over the outdoor fire, while Genevieve chopped wild onions from the garden. The sun slid low, gilding the fence, the barn roof, and her hair until each strand shone like spun thread. They ate at the small porch table, no tablecloth, just worn white enamel plates and their 2 tin cups. Better than yesterday, he said, cutting into her cornbread. She kept her eyes on the garden, maybe because today I know where I'll be eating. His gaze locked on her. She set her fork down, fingers lacing together. Lawson, I don't want to just be here out of gratitude. I want to be truly part of this place. He didn't speak right away, his fingers drumming lightly on the cup's rim. If that's what you want, then tomorrow. We plan for more than one season, not just one season, she said, her breath slow and steady. I want to stay longer, as long as you want me to, leaning forward into the lamplight. He spoke low and certain. I've wanted that since the moment you stepped off that wagon. The wind seemed to ease, cottonwood leaves whispering their agreement overhead. She reached across the table, and he took her hand large, warm, holding as though it wasn't something he intended to let go. They stayed like that, letting the quiet speak for them. The hens were silent now, the air laced with the smell of wood smoke and cooling earth. She smiled small, easy, without need for reason. Then, let's begin. He nodded once. Begin. The moon rose over the ridge, silver, spilling across the yard, the fence, and the 2 of them on the porch. No longer strangers under the same roof, but 2 people who had found where they meant to belong. Part 3. A trust bigger than themselves. July mornings rose pale and white now, no longer honey gold, like the start of the season. The wind carried the scent of scorched grass and dry earth down from the ridges. Lawson had led a wiry, quick-witted horse from the corral at first light. Not his strongest mount, but gentle enough not to spook a beginner, and clever enough to test anyone who tried to guide it. Genevieve came down the slope in a riding dress she'd altered the night before. The skirt flared just enough to sit comfortably in the saddle, her hair tied low and neat. Practical, without feeling bound, she stopped at the gate, her gaze a blend of caution and resolve. I've never ridden anything, except the carousel at the church fair. That's still better than nothing, Lawson replied. No smile, no teasing. He bent, lacing his hands to give her a step up. She placed her foot, let him lift her into the saddle. The motion was gentle, but once she was settled, he stepped back half a pace, his eyes as steady as if he'd just handed her the reins to a responsibility. Hold firm, but don't cling. A horse can feel your hands, and if it runs, then pull right. I'll be on the left. That last line struck harder than the sound of hooves on dry earth. Lawson walked beside the horse's flank, one hand on the spare lead rope, the other loose near her knee. When the animal shifted, humping its back in a half-hearted test, she leaned instinctively, pressing her knees into the saddle. Good, he said, short and low, but there was something in his tone, rough-edged approval, that made her proud. They circled the dry paddock. The sun grew stronger. Sweat, beating on her temples. Each lap, Lawson loosened his grip on the rope, letting her steer more herself. By the fourth lap, when the horse tried to veer right, she tightened the left rein and pressed with her knee, bringing it back on track. He gave her a rare flicker of a smile. "You did that yourself, and I'm still in the saddle." She was breathing hard, but her eyes were bright. When the lesson ended, Lawson's hand lingered a beat longer than necessary as he helped her down. They walked the horse back to the corral in step, saying nothing, but with every stride, Genevieve felt something shifting, not just in her riding, but in the sense that he'd handed her a piece of this place to hold steady on her own. Evening poured down like warm molasses, the last light sliding across the new fence, catching on the red barn roof, settling on the scarred porch table, whose knife marks were as honest as an old man's smile lines. Lawson washed his hands at the pump, the water ringing against the tin basin, then dried them on the towel. Looped over the post, Genevieve fed wood into the outdoor stove. The smell of beans mingled with wood smoke, warm as a quilt pulled to your chest in late autumn. Dinner was simple beans, cornbread, a little thin-sliced salt pork on old enamel plates. A breeze rattled the curtain in the window, carrying the dry sweetness of cut hay from across the creek. They ate slowly, no long talk, just the scrape of spoons and the steady breath of two people who'd worked under a hard sun, when only red embers remained in the stove. Genevieve went inside. Lawson thought she was fetching water or clearing dishes, but she returned with an oilcloth-wrapped bundle. She set it on the table as if placing down a secret. "This," she hesitated, testing whether the wind would carry her voice away. "I want you to have," he unwrapped it, a deep blue work shirt, thick enough for ranch mornings, the collar and shoulders double-stitched, small round wooden buttons sewn with matching thread. He ran his thumb along the inside of the collar, feeling the cool, tight weave. He looked up. "You made this?" "Yes." She glanced down, seeing it again through her own hands. "Found the fabric in the trunk, back in Chicago. I used to mend for dock workers. Just habit. I thought it might fit." Silence moved through the porch, but not the cold kind. Lawson shrugged off his suspenders, tried it on. The shoulders fit close, sleeves ending right at the wrist bone. As he fastened the second button, Genevieve gave a small, quiet laugh that lit her eyes. "Fits. Like you measured me." "Didn't measure," she said, "but I knew." He didn't ask how. Out here, some things, you just knew about each other without the asking. The lamplight softened the angles of his face. He sat again, hands resting on the table, fingertips still carrying the memory of thread under cloth. "Thank you," he said. Few words, the kind that, from Lawson, meant more. The wind shifted, cottonwood leaves brushing each other in a whisper. Genevieve slid her chair closer, not much, just enough that her knee touched the shadow of his on the floorboards. She looked at the shirt, then the garden, the crooked fence, a plain witness to everything said here. "Lawson," she said, slow and deliberate, "I've thought a lot about belonging. I don't want to be someone passing through, not here out of debt. I want to stay, to build." The words landed like a small bird choosing to rest in a hand. Lawson didn't answer right away. He tapped the table once with his wrist, eyes never leaving her. "Stay," he repeated, tasting the word. "And build." "Yes, then. Tomorrow, we go into town for nails, seed, and good wire for the chicken coop. We'll mark off the west garden for planting. Next season we'll be busy." She gave a soft laugh. "You always answer with work. Talk is easy to forget. Fences aren't." She spread her hand flat on the table, as if mapping something invisible. "Over there," she pointed toward the pale patch of ground. "I want sunflowers by fall. It'll be a wall of gold. Done." I'll run a pipe from the creek. Might trade old iron pipe from town for a few squash come harvest. She looked at him a long moment. The last daylight slipped from the new shirt, leaving its blue, deep as night water, in her eyes. Something moved slow, like snow touching a winter river, melting and blending in. I'm afraid, she admitted, barely above a whisper. Afraid one day I won't be enough. Afraid if someone asks, I'll feel like an outsider again. People can ask, Lawson said evenly. Warm. We'll answer with the garden, the fence, the coop, with mornings lit and lamps burning at night. No one can argue with a life being lived. She laughed, longer this time, like a note she wanted to keep. She fetched a coil of twine and a folding knife from the trunk, set them between them. Tomorrow, we mark the sunflower plot. Itai, you set the posts. All right, I drive them straighter than you anyway. You're better at that. She smirked. Inside, the fiddle leaned against the porch wall, its wood catching stray light like a banked ember. Genevieve pulled her shawl closer, but her eyes kept straying to the shirt he wore. A new shirt couldn't change a life, but it could say, a pair of hands is expecting you home. A pair of eyes knows the span of your shoulders by heart. Someone once told me, love needs vows, she said suddenly. I think love needs a fence set straight, a garden watered, and 2 cups side by side without asking permission. Lawson tipped his head, eyes bright under the brim, resting on the table. Sometimes it just needs what you've said. Her ears warmed, but she didn't look away. I want to stay, she said, the English clear on her tongue, firm yet gentle. I want to stay. Build together. The breeze stirred. The cottonwood branches shivered, as if the earth itself answered, Amen. Lawson's hand came to rest over hers, not gripping, just touching. Then we stay and build, he said, each word solid as good timber. Together, at the horizon, a thin spill of stars emerged. The creek below the hill murmured what it had for 100 years. Keep flowing, and the stones will round. On the porch, 2 people sat with a blue shirt, a coil of twine, a folding knife, and a decision placed like the first stone of a foundation. The noisy Wild West beyond the gunshots, the hoofbeats. The trains seemed far away. Here, a different kind of Western romance was writing itself. Fewer words, more doing, fewer promises, more staying. Sometimes, the best Wild West stories didn't need a grand ending. Just a hand resting on another hand, both looking toward the land that would bloom. Before turning in, Genevieve cleared the dishes, smoothed the small cloth on the table. Lawson banked the embers, the fire settling like a story that had found its last line. He opened the door, letting her step in first. The lock on the front room was still there, but tonight she didn't see it as a fortress. Safety was elsewhere, in his footsteps in the kitchen, in the wood smoke caught in the rafters, in the blue shirt hanging by the hearth, waiting to be worn to town at sunrise. We leave early, Lawson said, dimming the lamp. I know, she replied, a calm smile on her lips. Sunflowers need straight posts. He smiled, with his eyes a rare thing. And we need a long day. The night settled over the roof like an unspoken vow. In the late 19th century West, where people could lose each other in the wind, there were still porches where a person could sit and know they'd found the right place, where a shirt sewn by hand could change the course of a life, not because it was fine, but because someone had made it thinking. I see you and I'm here. Part 4. The decision to stay. By the time sunlight had just begun to spill over the barn roof, Genevieve was already in the chicken coop. The warm musk of straw and feathers mixed into a scent no one would call sweet. Yet to her, it was the smell of having a place to wake up to. and something worth doing that was hers. She scattered grain with a rhythm that had grown familiar. The hens bustled around her skirts, heads bobbing, pecking in a steady cluck, cluck that sounded like the hum of a quiet day. Sunlight slipped through gaps in the wooden slats, pooling in bright, dusty patches on her dress, even catching the small hand-stitched mend at its hem, making it shine like proof of care. Footsteps crunched across the yard steady, unhurried. Lawson opened the coop door, ducking inside with the dust of the road still on his shirt. In one hand, he held a soft-brimmed hat, dusted in pale brown, a sign he'd met someone in town. Genevieve glanced up, asking simply. Something happened. He stopped a step away, careful not to startle the hens. Someone stopped by, said next week. Land surveyors from Helena will be coming through. They're marking boundaries before the territory files for statehood. She froze mid-motion, the last grain falling to the straw, with a sound so small they both heard it. Does your land fall in that area? Lawson gave a short nod. Part of the west section. It's never been officially measured since my father's day. Her lips pressed tight, a flicker of concern in her eyes. If there's a dispute, he met her gaze, voice steady and certain. You're not leaving here. We built this place together. The words landed in the cramped air of the coop, like a fence post driven straight into the ground. The hens kept pecking. The faint thump of a wing filled the silence between them. She looked at him, and her eyes trembled, not with fear, but with something stronger, the feeling of being claimed in the truest sense. Not a guest, not charity, but part of this place. She breathed deep, drawing in the scents of straw, road dust, and sun-warmed cotton from his blue shirt. You said, together, I didn't say the rest out loud. Lawson admitted with a small nod. But I've thought it for a long time. The step of space between them no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a strip of land they'd just measured. Both of them, knowing the line of twine stretched there belonged to them and to no one else. They stepped out into the brightening yard, the sun higher and hotter now, but neither of them minded. Lawson walked ahead, his pace easy enough for her to match. In his hand, a coil of twine swung with each step, the loose end trailing like a lazy snake. At the west plot, the same place they'd measured weeks ago, for the sunflowers, he stopped. Weeds hugged the base of the posts. The air was thick with the smell of dry dirt and the faint resin of new-cut wood. When they come, we'll show them every line, Lawson said, his voice deep as wood knocking wood. Every post, she murmured, brushing the worn top of one with her fingers. We set together, he nodded, and if we have to, we'll set them again, together. She stood straight, the wind teasing her skirt so it brushed his leg. I don't think of myself as a guest here anymore. Lawson? His nod was small, but carried more weight than any deed of title. Good. Guests can leave them. Family stays. They walked the boundary line, pausing at each post as if revisiting the day they'd sunk it. She ran her fingertips along the twine as they passed. At the final post, where the land dipped toward the rock flats, Lawson turned. The sun behind him lit her face, and her eyes seemed to hold the whole of the property in them. Do you ever think? It all started with me being left in front of an empty house. I do, Lawson said, and I think neither of us intends to end it there. Her smile carried both strength and release. The wind lifted it, carried it beyond the fence, over the hills, as if telling the land itself that these two had decided to stay. By late afternoon, the light mellowed to honey. Lawson came from the barn with a fresh post. Its tip sharpened, the wood smoothed. A heavy hammer hung from his other hand. He carried them to the far end of the plot where they'd stood that morning. Genevieve followed with a small coil of twine. She didn't ask what he meant to do. The answer was in her eyes. Curiosity mingled with a quiet, eager anticipation. He set the post into a shallow hole, its tip fitting snug. Laying down the hammer, he looked at her. "This is the last section without a mark. We'll set it so no one forgets who it belongs to." He steadied the post, then held out the hammer. She hesitated, glancing at the calloused lines of his hand before taking it. "I've never set a post before. Now, you will." The first strike rang solid, startling a pair of sparrows into flight. Lawson stayed, close hands loose at his sides, ready if she missed. The second strike, then the third. Each blow sank the post deeper, the uncertainty on her face replaced by resolve. When the post was hip-high, Lawson laid his hand over hers on the hammer. Last one. Together, the hammer fell. The sound carried into the earth, up through their boots. The post stood straight, stubborn as a vow. Genevieve touched its top. Lawson's palm joined hers across the rough grain. No words, but the look they shared was its own binding contract. The breeze caught the loose end of the twine, lifting it. She tied it off with a neat knot. "No one's cutting this line. No one," Lawson said, low and certain, "so long as we keep it." They stayed a while, fixing the image into memory light, wind, the feel of solid wood beneath their hands. That night, a softer chill crept in. The porch lamp swayed gently, spilling gold onto the planks in wavering patterns. Lawson sat on the steps, back against a post, a steaming tin cup in his hand. Genevieve sat in a wooden chair beside him, shawl wrapped close, sometimes smoothing its edge over her arms. Crickets sang far off. The horses shifted in their stalls, and the cottonwood sighed overhead. These were the sounds you only learned to hear after you'd been somewhere long enough to belong. Setting his cup down, Lawson said, "Today, when we set that post, I thought about the day you stood outside this place, alone." She smiled faintly toward the dark. "So did I. And I thought, if you hadn't said, 'You will not be sleeping out here,' I wouldn't be here now." He nodded, the lamplight catching the strong planes of his face. "Today, I'd say it again. Only this time, instead of you, I'd say we. We built this place together." Her eyes caught the lamp's glow. "This time, you're not just trying to reassure me." "No." He shook his head. "I'm stating a fact. This isn't my house with you in it. It's our house." She was quiet for a beat, then reached over, resting her hand on his. It was rough, faintly scented with wood and iron, and to her, it smelled like a place that couldn't be taken away. "Then, Lawson, I'll stay, not because I have nowhere else, but because I want nowhere else." He didn't answer. With words, only tightened his hold on her hand. Outside, the new post stood tall. The twine pulled taut, binding them to the land and to each other. The next morning, the sun was barely cresting the hill when hoofbeats came from the trail. Genevieve swept the porch with a willow broom, its bristles whispering over the boards. Lawson emerged from the barn, hay still clinging to his shoulders. A man in a thick coat and low-brimmed hat rode up on a chestnut gelding, dismounted, and tied his reins to the gate. From an inner pocket, he produced a bundle of papers bound with twine. "I'm from the land office in Helena, ordered to resurvey before statehood. Boundaries have to be clear." Lawson stepped down from the porch, standing straight, neither dodging nor challenging the man's look. "You surveying all parcels in the area?" "Yes." "And without proper papers, there can be disputes?" Genevieve's grip on the broom handle tightened. Her heartbeat picked up, but she didn't step back. Lawson glanced at her briefly, then faced the man, voice even, and sure, "We'll walk you through it. This land's been built, cared for, and defended together. The man's brows lifted slightly at the word, but he nodded. Then let's start at the first post. They led him out. Genevieve, carrying the same coil of twine that still held the warmth from last night's work. At the east fence line, Lawson stopped, set his hand on a post, and motioned for her to place hers beside it before the surveyor looked. You see, Lawson said, every post here has both our hands on it, not just mine. The surveyor was quiet a moment, then nodded. Then, the record will carry both your names. Something in Genevieve's chest tightened, then opened, like drawing the first full breath in years. She looked at Lawson, and in his slight nod, she read the words he didn't need to speak. Now, this is our home, in every way. Far down the line, the morning sun caught on the taut run of twine, making it glow like a thread of gold. And along that golden line, two shadows walked side by side, steady as the ground beneath them. Part 5. A lifetime together. That summer, the sky was so clear, not a single cloud dared drift across it. The old cottonwood by the creek was heavy with leaves, its broad crown stirring in the breeze, throwing a deep circle of shade on the grass below. Tiny white blossoms fell like summer snow, catching in hair and on shoulders. Genevieve wore a simple cream dress, each seam stitched in long, quiet nights under lamplight, no veil, no string of pearls, just a wreath of wildflowers in her hair, with a few cottonwood blossoms tucked among them. Lawson wore an old white shirt, dark work trousers, boots worn smooth with years, and his everyday hat today resting quietly on a branch nearby. The wedding was small, a handful of people who mattered. The old preacher from town, the neighboring ranch couple, and two friends who had helped them set their fence line. There were no costly gifts, only baskets of bread, a few bottles of apple cider, and blessings spoken straight from the heart. The preacher's voice was warm and steady, like water over stone. When he asked Lawson, "Do you promise to stand by her in harvest and in loss, in health and in sickness, in days of joy and in nights of hardship?" Lawson met Genevieve's eyes, clear and unwavering. "I already do." When it was Genevieve's turn, the preacher asked, "Do you promise to stand by him when the wind is fair and when the storms rise, when the land is rich and when it turns to dust?" She smiled, a smile both light and deep. "No, I got more. I promise to keep building with him." The preacher nodded, his weathered face softening with approval. There was no burst of applause, only the wind in the cottonwood leaves, the creek's quiet murmur, and the way their eyes held each other, making the vows more real and enduring than any ceremony could. When it ended, Lawson didn't kiss her in front of everyone. He simply pressed his forehead to hers, his hand resting at her back, as if to say, "We are here, and we will remain." The meal after was under the cottonwood shade cornbread, cider, wildflowers on the table, laughter blending with birdsong. And in the middle of it all, Genevieve realized their home wasn't just the cabin or the land. It was the people who had witnessed and blessed this day. 15 years passed since that morning under the cottonwood. This autumn, the orchard behind the house glowed gold. Apple, pear, and plum trees stood in straight lines, their gnarled trunks heavy with fruit. The air was thick with the sweet scent of ripeness, mingling with the damp earth after last night's rain. Genevieve's hair was longer now, silver, threaded through dark brown. She walked slowly between the rows, a basket of apples swinging from her arm. Sunlight slanted through the leaves, painting her face in warm patches, showing the lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of wind, sun, and more smiles than she could count. At the far end of the orchard, Lawson balanced on a wooden ladder, filling a crate with fruit. His shoulders had grown broader, his back bent a little with the years, but every movement was as steady as the day she'd met him. "We'll need another basket," she called. He glanced down, eyes crinkling. "Thought I'd picked it all." She pointed to a high branch. "No, I got more." The words made him pause, as if hearing an echo from 15 years ago. His smile was small, deep, the kind that starts in the eyes. They picked the last of the fruit together. Each time he handed her an apple, their fingers brushed familiar touches, needing no apology. It felt as natural as breathing, as if they'd been made to repeat these small gestures for a lifetime. When the baskets were full, they sat on the long bench beneath the oldest apple tree. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the rustle of leaves above, the hum of bees, the quiet heat of him beside her. She wanted to close her eyes and keep it forever. "You know," Lawson murmured, "everything here. The orchard, the cabin, the fence started the day I told you. You will not be sleeping out here." Genevieve opened her eyes, smiling. "And it won't end until neither of us is here." The breeze carried the scent of fruit and seasons past. They both knew in that moment that a lifetime together wasn't one grand promise. It was thousands of small acts, repeated until they became who they were. Years later, a cool morning fog blanketed the valley. The cottonwood still stood by the creek, more gnarled now, its roots rising higher, but its shade still wide and sheltering. Beneath it sat an old wooden chair facing the sunrise. Genevieve's hair was silver white as she stepped from the porch. In her hands, the wool shawl Lawson had given her many winters ago. She laid it on the chair before sitting, folding her hands in her lap. The orchard was still gold each autumn, the fence still upright, the porch still creaked underfoot. But beside her, there was no sound of boots on the boards, no calloused hand resting on hers. Lawson had been gone a few years now. She didn't cry. Instead, she looked toward the first post they'd ever set together. The old twine had long since been replaced, but it still tied the posts as tight as that day. "You see, Lawson, I'm still here," she whispered. "No, I got more. I've had all the seasons after you." The morning wind brought the smell of wet earth, cottonwood leaves, and the faint sweetness of apples. She closed her eyes, breathing it in as if he had just placed a hand on her shoulder. When she opened them, the first sunlight had spilled over the hill, touching the chair, the fence post, and her hands. She smiled, resting her palm on the ground, the land they had built and kept together, and which she now kept for them both. Far above, a bird crossed the sky, its shadow sweeping over the orchard and fence before vanishing toward the mountains. She watched until it was gone, the air left with only the wind and the sound of leaves. Under the cottonwood, she knew, a lifetime together didn't end when one was gone. It lived on in the soil, in the wind, and in the heart that stayed. That afternoon, sunlight slanted gold over the valley. Genevieve stood on the porch, fingers brushing the worn wood of the door Lawson had closed each night. Her gaze went to the orchard, where her grandchildren ran between the rows, their laughter rolling out across the land like a promise that life would keep going. As full as those first seasons, she stepped down onto the yard, the old boots making their familiar thud on the boards. At the cottonwood, she stopped, the light falling in shifting patterns across her face. She knelt, laying her hand on the soil. Her voice was low, almost a prayer. "We kept it all, Lawson, and I'm still here." The wind rose, spinning a few leaves down to her feet. One landed in her palm. She smiled, lifted it, and walked back toward the porch, carrying it like a message from him, a reminder that love doesn't live only in memory. Behind her, the fence, the orchard, and the little house stood quiet and strong. Time could change many things, but they remained proof of a lifetime together, not built by grand vows, but by the small, Daily acts repeated over the years, and in the hush of that place, the storyteller's voice would drift out, steady and low. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Leave your thoughts below and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a ride. A home isn't where you hide, it's where you stay. And sometimes, staying is the most complete way to love. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, write in the comments. I understand Lawson